Hey guys, Brender Into Productions here, and welcome to another Visual Basic .NET tutorial. In this tutorial, I will be talking about custom events and how to use them. This will be a semi-basic overview tutorial, just in order to get you started with custom events in your own objects and using them within your program. So let's go ahead and get started. So I'm just going to go ahead and create a new Windows Forms application in the .NET Framework 2.0, and I'm just going to go ahead and name this tutorial, or name this project Event Tutorial. Alright, and we'll just give this a little while to create because everybody knows that Visual Studio is rather slow. So why would you want to use custom events? Well, so if you add a random control to your form, let's just go ahead and add a button from the toolbox whenever it decides to load. So I'm just going to go ahead and add a standard button to the form. Now we can actually double click on this button and we can drop down this menu here, and as you can see we have all of these events that we actually can deal with. What if we want to handle certain things that aren't in this event? Well, that's where custom events come in. So let's go ahead and give a pretty basic overview of custom events and get more advanced as things go on. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to put a text box into our form, a text box and a button, and when the button is pressed and the text box, or when the button is pressed, usually nothing will happen, because what's going to happen is the button one click event is going to trigger. However, if there's certain text within the text box, we can actually raise our own event. So in order to actually work with custom events, the first thing that you need to do is you need to actually make an event. So in order to do that, you just want to create a public global variable that's an event variable. So we're just going to say public event, and we're going to name this donut event, or donut typed, donut activated. Alright, so now we've got this event donut activated sitting here as a global variable, and right now it's not really doing anything. It's just kind of sitting there. Except what we can do now is if we actually click on the Form 1 Events button right here, this drop down, and then we look at the declarations, you can now see that donut activated is an event that we can actually choose. So if we click on it, we actually get a code snippet right here that is activated when the event donut activated is called. So that's kind of cool. Visual Studio automatically generates code for you, depending on your event. But let's go ahead and get ready with this event. So if we actually go back to our form, we can see that we have a text box and we have a button. Well, if the button is clicked, which of course is an event, but if the button is clicked and the user has actually already typed donut within the text box, we can go ahead and raise the event donut activated, which essentially triggers the event, and then we'll call this method down here. So we're just going to say if textbox1.text.equals donut. And you know what? We don't want to worry about the actual casing of the actual case of the text. So we don't care if the user types donut with a capital D or a capital O or whatever. So we're just going to want to type textbox1.text.toLower, which actually brings everything to lowercase. So we're going to be analyzing everything inside of a lowercase method. So if everything in the lowercase equals donut, well, then we're actually going to want to trigger the event. But how do you trigger events? Well, you use the raise event command. So we're just going to want to raise the event. If I could spell raise event properly, we're going to want to raise the event donut activated. So what this is essentially doing is once the button is clicked, if the text is equal to donut, then we are going to actually raise the event donut activated, which is stored up here, which then calls this method because it handles donut activated. So when we actually, when form 1 donut activated, we're actually going to send a message box, and we're going to say hole, because there's donut holes. Might not really be the most appropriate thing, but hey, this is not anything that's meant to be officially appropriate. So now we can go ahead and actually test out this application by pressing the debug button, and we have this form and a text box and a button. So we're going to actually type in pastry to our text box, and if we press the button, nothing happens. Well, the button one click method is actually triggered but nothing happens because we don't have a case for that. But if we end up typing donut, and keep in mind we're going to use crazy capitalization because we don't care, because it brings everything to lowercase before it compares it. So if we type donut and press button 1, we actually get the message box that says whole. And that's because the event was triggered. Now there are also more things that we can actually do with the event. So we can actually make events have parameters. So how do we actually activate that? Well, let's go ahead and actually delete all of this code. So now we can actually have the donut activated parameter. And we can actually have a parameter of, let's just say, type as string. So although this doesn't really look like it makes much sense, because we're creating an event, but then we're sending it a parameter, or we're just creating it a parameter like we're creating our own subroutine or function, well, you'll see how it works in just a second. Because now, if we go ahead and we want to deal with when the form1 event donut activated. Okay. And now, when we actually create the event method here, you can see that we have this parameter type as string to work with. So now we can go ahead and simply message box out type. And of course, this doesn't do much until we actually send in a type. So if we jump back to our form and double click on the button, you can see that we enter the button onClick method. So what we want to do is we're going to have the same type of layout here. So we're going to say if text box 1.text.toLower dot equals donut. Then what we're going to want to do is we're actually going to want to trigger. We're going to raise the event of donut activated. Raise event donut activated. And as you can see, now we actually have the option of sending in a type. Well, since we don't actually want to add another text box because that's semi-complicated, we can just go ahead and make a type of, let's just say, a sprinkled cake donut. And as you can see, so when the button is actually clicked, if we type donut into the text box, we're going to raise the event donut activated and send in the parameter of, well, sprinkled cake. And that sprinkled cake will actually message box out because it's going to hit the form1 donut activated method, and then we're just grabbing the type that we sent in. So if we start debugging this application, it's going to work as expected. We type donut in crazy capitalization, press the button, and as you can see, we get a message box with sprinkled cake. So this actual application of events may not be the best. However, let's go ahead and raise the bar a little bit. Let's go ahead and work on our own object. So we're going to go ahead and right-click on our event tutorial project over here and press Add, and then we're going to add a user control. We're just going to create a new user control, and we're going to name this user control Donut Selected, or Donut Selector. So what we can go ahead and do is we're just going to leave the background color as control because we want to be able to see it easily. So what the Donut Selector is it's actually going to be a group of radio buttons so the user can actually select some donuts. So let's go ahead and add a bunch of radio buttons into this control here. We're just going to take these and then we're going to press the format button and we're going to make them center in the form horizontally. We're also going to want to make the vertical spacing equal, make the horizontal spacing equal. That is not what we wanted. We want to center in the form horizontally. No, we don't. Oh boy, don't ever try using those format commands. Okay, so let's just go ahead and drag them a little bit. Who cares if they're organized, right? Right. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and give each radio button a unique text that contains a type of donut. So this is going to be a cake donut. This is going to be a chocolate bar donut. This one is going to go ahead and be an old-fashioned donut. This one's going to be jelly-filled. This one is going to be cream custard filled. We can't forget our fritters, so this one's going to go ahead and be a fritter. This one, let's just say, is going to be a plain donut. Ew. Actually, I love plain donuts. And this one is going to be a cinnamon roll. So now we have a bunch of radio buttons that represent a bunch of different donuts. So what we want to do is we want to actually be able to drag this control onto the form and then be alerted every time the actual donut selection is made. So once this is going to do is this is going to appear on the form, and the user is actually only going to be able to select one of these donuts. But we want to alert the programmer when the donut selection is actually changed. So there's one way of doing this, and that's actually by using this. We can double click on each radio button individually and manage their check changed method. Well, we could do that, or we can create an event that manages all of them at once. So we can go ahead and actually create event, public event, donut selection changed. And then we can utilize our new knowledge of parameters, and we can actually say by val selected donut as string. So now we're going to be able to send the user more information about what donut was selected by actually having a selected donut string parameter. So now we can go ahead and actually work with raising the events. So what we can do is we can actually just double click on our control here and get the check changed method of one radio button. Now what we can do is we can either say handles radio button 1.checkChanged, and then we can put a comma, and we can say radio button 2.checkChanged, and we can do this for all of the radio buttons. Or we can do a little trick. We can actually go ahead and grab all of the controls on the form, and we can actually give them one method. So we're actually going to say public sub checkbox or radio button check changed, and this sub is actually going to handle all of the check changed all of the actual check changed events. So once again, if we double click on this and get the check changed event, you can see that well, we could do this, but let's just go ahead and make this easy. So what we're going to do is we're going to simply take this radio button 1 check changed event, and we're going to go ahead and just tag on all the other radio buttons. So we're going to just say radio button 2.checkChanged, radio button 3.checkChanged, radio button 4.checkChanged, radio button 5.checkChanged, radio button 6.checkChanged, radio button 7.checked and then radio button 8.checked. So that's one way of doing this. So we're just going to tag on all the radio buttons onto the same method. Now I'm just going to go ahead and work with the idea that I had before. So we're also going to be able to, or we can also have the ability to create a generic check changed method that handles everything by adding them on. So we can say public sub radio button check changed, and give it the parameters of sender as system.object and e as system.event_args. So essentially what we're doing with this method is we're actually copying the generic check changed method for each radio button, except what we're going to do is when the form actually loads, or when this user control actually loads, we can do this by going to donut selector events and we'll grab the load event here. So when the load event actually loads, what we're going to do is we're going to cycle through all of the controls within the form, and then we're actually going to want to, if the event is a radio button, we're going to bind the check changed event to a method. So this is once again playing around with events. So we're going to say for each C as control in form1 or in me.controls rather. And what this is going to do is grab all of the controls that we have placed within this donut selector control. So we're going to say if the type of C, which is all of the controls we're scrolling through, is a radio button. So if we're scrolling through the controls and we just happen to land on a radio button, then what we're going to do is we're actually going to first create an instance of that radio button object. So as we're scrolling through each control in this particular user control that we're working on, we're grabbing each control. And if we detect that the type of this control that we grab is a radio button, well then what we first need to do is convert the C, which is a control, to a radio button by saying dim radio button as, or dim radio button control as radio button, and that's going to be equal. So what we want to do is simply convert our C control here to a radio button. So that can be done with the ctype command. And now we're going to be able to convert the radio button control, or radio rather C to a radio button. So now we have a radio button control object, and now all we want to do is add the handler for the event. So as you can see in this elongated method here, what we did is we said handles and then we tagged everything on. Well, you can also, instead of manually tagging things on, you can say that you could use the add handler statement, and this actually allows you to programmatically add things on. So we're going to add the handler of radio button control dot checked changed, and then we're just going to go ahead and send this to the address of our method that we created. So we created the radio button check changed method. So we can go ahead and just, every time that the radio button control dot checked changed event triggers, we're going to trigger this method. So in order to do that, we need to send this over to the address of our method, which is radio button check changed. So now when the donut selector is actually loaded, what we want to do, or what's going to happen, is it's going to scroll through and it's going to grab all of the radio buttons, and then it's going to go and actually add their events. When the check changed event occurs, it's going to send them to this method. So this allows us to dynamically constantly be adding radio buttons, so we can add as many radio buttons to this control as we want, and they will all be handled by our current code. So when the actual checked changed method or event is triggered, it will send a signal to the radio button check changed, and what it will do is the sender object as a parameter here will actually be the radio button that triggered the event. So this is the radio button that actually changed its check. So what we want to do is we actually want to convert this sender object into a radio button. So we're going to say if type of sender is radio button, then what we're going to do is we're going to create a radio button object. So we're going to say dim radio button sender as radio button equal to, and then once again we're going to convert, so we're going to say C type of sender, and we're going to convert it to a radio button. And then what we're going to do with this radio button sender object is we're actually going to see if it was checked or if it was not. So we're going to say if radio button sender dot checked equals true. Well, this means that the selection of the donut has actually changed. So what we want to do now is we actually want to go ahead and raise our custom event. So we're going to go ahead and raise the event of donut selection changed. Selection changed. And then we're able to send in the parameter of the selected donut. Well, the selected donut is actually saved within the text of the radio button, as we saw when we created all the radio buttons. So in order to actually send the selected donut in, we can go ahead and just say radio button sender, which again is the checked radio button, dot text. So now that we have a custom control that adds all of the handlers and binds them to this event when the control is actually loaded, and then it goes ahead and every time a check is changed, it actually checks to see if it's a radio button. And if it is a radio button and it is actually checked, we can go ahead and raise our custom event donut selection changed, and then we actually send in our radio button text. So we can go ahead and test this out by actually building our project. So we're going to go ahead and rebuild the event tutorial. And then if we jump back to our form here, we can actually look in the toolbox, and in our event tutorial component section, there's our new donut selector. So we can go ahead and pop that right into our form. And we can go ahead and move it over here, just create its own little space for it. So now if we actually double click on the donut selector object that we just popped into our form, we can go ahead and go into our events, and we can probably find, in fact we will find, our custom donut selection changed event. And as you can see here, we have the selected donut as string to deal with. So what we're able to do is we are now able to actually retrieve the selected donut. So we can go ahead and say message box, and we're going to actually message box out the selected donut. So now that we went through that whole roundabout scheme to make our own custom control with dynamically allocated radio boxes or radio buttons that will actually raise a custom event, we can go ahead and test it out. So if we start debugging this project, we can go ahead and simply select the chocolate bar. And as you can see, it message boxes out our chocolate bar. If we select old-fashioned, it message boxes our old-fashioned. If we select plain, and message boxes are plain. Fritter, and message boxes are fritter. Custard filled, and message box is custard filled. So since what we did is we actually created a custom event that is activated every time a radio button is checked, and this radio button checked method is bound to the radio buttons that are existent on the user control when the control loads, there's actually a possibility of adding unlimited amounts of radio buttons. So we can go ahead and add a few more donuts. We can make this donut, let's just make this donut a strawberry donut. Strawberry. And then this donut is going to be a sprinkled donut. And then this donut is simply going to be a delicious donut. Now if we actually rebuild our project and then jump over to our form, we can see that our new donuts are added to our control. And we can go ahead and run the project. And as you can see, just like before, our new donuts work just like the other ones. So when we click them, their names pop up in a message box. Now, although that may not have been the most efficient way to do this in our project, if you wanted to actually distribute this donut selector object and use it for other projects or send it to friends, well, all they would need to do is import it into their project, double-click it, and then grab the donut selection changed event, and already they can just get the event and get the immediate selected donut. They don't even have to work with any backwork or deal with any of the radio buttons. This method or this event is already created for them, and they are able to access the selected donut in one line of code, straight from that. So what you're doing essentially with custom events is you're setting it up to be easier for yourself. So instead of dealing with, like for example, every time an event is triggered you have to gather information, you can create a custom event that actually throws that information to you. So this has been a basic overview of how to use custom events to make things a little easier. So if you're creating your own custom object, or if you just want to create a custom event when something specific happens, like in our first example, when we typed donut, something specific happened, and we used an event to trigger that, well, you can go for it, because events are seriously helpful in the programming universe. So hopefully this tutorial helped you out. I know it was a little sketchy, but that's because this is a rather complicated topic. But I did want to create a tutorial that went over it. So thanks for watching this video, and I hope you are having a fantastic day and that you're feeling great. Please remember to rate, comment, subscribe, and if you have any suggestions or tips or even some requests for tutorials, don't be afraid to leave a comment. Alright, I will see you guys in future videos. Talk to you later. Peace.